Okay, recently there have been a few more Whispers of the Old Gods cards revealed. There's a pretty consistent schedule of one per day coming out, and sometimes Blizzard just throws in an extra two or so. Faceless Shambler is a lot like Faceless Manipulator, and it basically requires that you, instead of either you or your opponent, has a really good card out already. Instead of copying that card, you copy the attack and health. That's mostly what you cared about with Faceless Manipulator also. In order for this card to be good, you need to have something that's about 5/5 in stats out already. And that can be pretty difficult to do. It's for the same reason that any card that requires a card already be in play, it's tough to always consistently be in that position. So Faceless Shambler is kind of tough. I will say that this card seems really good with Molten Giant, though, or any giant which you can get the cost to be really low, because instead of having to taunt that giant, you just play the giant, and then you play Faceless Shambler on the giant, and bam, you have a 4-mana 8/8 with taunt. You can also play it with some of the really cheap cards, such as Ancient Watcher, Eerie Statue, and Fell Reaver. Also, there's some power overwhelming shenanigans you can do with it. Power overwhelming something, you Faceless Shamble it, and then you keep the buff permanently. It seems slow to me, and we don't even know if the giants yet in standard will remain unnerfed, but it seems like the most potential that this card has is going to be with giants. Bad news is, this card can get silenced and then becomes a 4-mana 1/1. Really rough, even worse than what happens when Twilight Drake is silenced. However, the good news about silence, though, is that there have been whispers that Blizzard might be looking to reduce the amount of viability of silence so that you actually need a hard counter to Faceless Shambler. Some people have speculated upon the non-inclusion of Keeper of the Grove in some of the basic decks that they put in the deck recipes, as like a Keeper of the Grove might get nerfed, and there were talks that Owl, which is a very prevalent silence, might also get nerfed. Maybe. We'll see. But the point is, with silence less prevalent, a card that gets wrecked when it gets silenced is not necessarily so bad. That said, this is all speculation, who knows. Suffice it to say, in short, Faceless Shambler seems to be best if you can cheat out low cost, high attack and high health minions, which would mostly be giants. Do you really want to play this over Defender of Argus, though, which you would just taunt up your big card anyways, which is how these things usually work? Is this going to be able to fit where Faceless Manipulator didn't? The only real benefit of this card over Faceless is that 1, power overwhelming works, 2, it costs 1 less. I myself am a bit pessimistic about this card, and I don't really think it'll see play, but if 0-mana 8/8s are a thing, maybe Faceless Shambler sees play. In Arena, this card is going to be awful. Next up, we have the card that Kripparrian got the sneak preview into, Hallazeal the Ascended. He talked this card up a lot, and for good reason. It's a 5-mana 4/6, which is decent stats. The baseline is the Pit Fighter's 5-mana 5/6. It just seems like a natural fit if mid-range or control Shaman were to be a thing. It is not currently a thing. So therefore, Hallazeal the Ascended in the current meta, where there's no control Shaman, is not currently a thing. That said, though, mid-range Shaman doesn't lose very much in the rotation, because in the rotation to standard, it still keeps a lot of the Grand Tournament cards that were thought to be pretty good. You play Hallazeal, you play Lightning Storm, you gain a lot of health. You play Hallazeal, you play Elemental Destruction, you gain a ridiculous amount of health. You compare it to Healbot, and you play Hallazeal, and then you play Lightning Storm, and you're basically getting a 5-mana 4/6, and you kind of gain 8, and you kind of get back up. Seems like a natural fit in any deck that runs Lightning Storm, is the short of it. So really, as powerful as a legendary as this might be, it is difficult to go that much into it without seeing the rest of the set and seeing if the tools for mid-range or control Shaman continue to be put in there. But if they do, and that deck becomes a viable archetype, I fully expect to see a lot of Hallazeal wandering around in many decks with 2 Lightning Storms in them, possibly an Elemental Destruction. And Hallazeal, by the way, survives Elemental Destruction. You play Hallazeal, you play Elemental Destruction. I think it's very often that you heal for 30. In Arena, this card is worse than Pit Fighter, because you usually can't get any synergy going with it. But Pit Fighter's a pretty good card. It's just a 5 mana 4/6, so it's kind of like an average-ish pick. Along with the theme of cards that fit new archetypes, which by the way I really love, and if this new expansion brings more cards that fit new archetypes along with the move to standard, things could really shake up a lot, and I'm looking forward to it a lot. So speaking of that, we have Undercity Huckster, which is a 2 mana 2/2 rogue card. Death Rattle, add a random class card to your hand from your opponent's class. It's directly comparable to Loot Hoarder, which is 2 mana 2/1, Death Rattle, draw a card. Getting that extra health, that makes it pretty good. In addition, you have Unearthed Raptor in Rogue. So you play this card on turn 2, you can play Unearthed Raptor on turn 3. Loot Hoarder is still going to be around, but maybe you put both Loot Hoarder and Undercity Huckster into the deck. Now, just a really well-statted card. Very much like Dark Peddler, where Dark Peddler will add a random, well, we'll discover a random-ish 1-drop. Undercity will add a completely random class card. Some of the class cards are absolute garbage, some class cards are awesome. Dark Peddler was great. Why not this card? And with Unearthed Raptor, why not this card? And with the card coming up soon that will also be revealed in this talk, maybe this card is going to be good in that one too. Part of the reason why mid-range Rogue didn't take off that much is because of the lack of 2-drops, but with both Loot Hoarder and Undercity Huckster fitting that 2-drop spot into Unearthed Raptor on 3, that deck has a lot more feet to go off of. It obviously lost a lot of legs when next Rammus is rotating out of Standard and you can't play the Creeper and then Unearthed Raptor the Creeper, but you can Unearthed Raptor the Undercity Huckster. In Arena, this card's going to be amazing. It's going to be just like Dark Peddler. Maybe a little bit weaker than Dark Peddler, but basically along those lines. Alright, this one is a whopper. We can see why Blizzard gave Force in that card. Look at that expression on that Warlock's face. He's really happy. He's being like, okay, the old gods are here. They're taking my job. Let's get out of this business. And let's become another class. This is a game changer. Now the question is it a game changer in the sense that Lock and Load is a game changer? Which is, it's a card that could in theory work but never actually worked? Or is it a card like Reno Jackson, where you built a lot of archetypes around Reno Jackson? That's a little bit unknown. Here's the potential upside to this card. You pay 2 mana and you gain 29 mana. Like, that's the best you can do. That would be the case where you have 30 Warlock cards in your deck and you play Renounce Darkness, and then your entire deck is a random class's cards, and you spent 2 mana to gain 29 mana for a net gain of 27 mana. That's the best case you can do. It'll never happen. Well, actually, it'll happen all the time because you can play this on turn 2. So you could potentially gain a 27 mana profit on your deck by playing this card. And that's incredible. So will we see decks from Warlock be made where there's a lot of class cards and then you play Renounce Darkness with the hopes that, yes, you have a random deck, but if your cards all cost 1 less, even with a random deck, your cards just might be like OP enough. Because a lot of the class cards are great, and a lot of the class cards are like bad or okay. But if you lower all of your cards' costs by 1, the okay cards become great, and the great cards become ridiculous, and the ridiculous cards become really ridiculous. You could put this in a zoo deck, and then you would just normally curve out with like Flame Imp and Void Caller, and then in the late game when you were tapping, maybe you just Renounce Darkness, and then you get a completely different stuff. Maybe it's more late game. Perhaps you have a Cthulhu deck. Cthulhu's minions seem to be mostly neutral. You play like a Cthulhu deck with a lot of neutral minions, you play a lot of Warlock cards, you Renounce Darkness somewhat early on, and then you still have your choice of playing the decent neutral Cthulhu minions, or you have your choice of playing like the new discounted class cards. Maybe you tap a lot, you're playing Handlock, and then you play Renounce Darkness, and then suddenly your hand is a lot of random cards, but they all cost one less, and then you just start playing them. I figure that if you have a full hand, Renounce Darkness becomes even better because you get to immediately enjoy the benefit of discounted cards. And you want to make sure that you use your hero power to the full extent while you can. A lot of possibilities here. Is it going to be amazing like Reno Jackson, or is it going to become lock and load, which is too niche to actually use in practice? I don't know yet, but I will be building a Renounce Darkness deck of at least one variety. I can say that much. There's a lot of questions posed by this card. From what I understand, you roll a die, and 1 in 8, you get like any class other than Warlock, and then you get that class's hero power and random cards from that class. Your spells don't necessarily turn into spells, your minions could turn into spells, your spells could turn into minions, but all your class cards are changing to the other class cards. Maybe you get 27 Tyrians. Maybe you get 27 Eye for an Eyes. All of this and more could happen when you Renounce Darkness. But more realistically, you get a even spread of everything. Worth mentioning is that you cannot Renounce Darkness twice, so you can't get 2 discounts, because Renounce Darkness is a Warlock card. Also worth mentioning is that if you Spellslinger Renounce Darkness, it's pretty bad because you will usually have no Warlock cards in your deck. This card will be really bad in Arena because in Arena you usually do not get that many of your class cards. Though if for some reason you pick a lot of Warlock class cards in Arena, then Renounce Darkness might not be complete trash. The Boogeymonster! Now with a name like that, you would expect that card to be amazing, right? Well, it is one of the worst legendaries I've ever seen. How could they print a card this bad? I don't even know. So here's some quick comparisons. Boulder Fist Ogre is a 6/7. It costs 6 and is a common. Foe Reaper 4000 is a card that was not really seeing any play. It's an 8 mana 6/9, so it shares a lot of similarities to the Boogeymonster. When Foe Reaper attacks, you kill 3 things with it. Sometimes, where you hard control the opponent, whereas the Boogeymonster has not only 2 less health, it's also less threatening. And another comparison to make is to Gruul, which is in the base set. 8 mana, when you pass the turn, it's an 8/8, and then when the opponent passes to you, it's a 9/9. The Boogeymonster, after it's passed to you, and if you kill a minion with it, when it attacks, not even when it defends, then it becomes an 8/9. So the Boogeymonster is so bad that I cannot even fathom why it is here. I cannot fathom why it's a card, unless perhaps there is a card that summons the Boogeymonster. And then that would make sense. So until I see that card, I am declaring this card the official bad legendary of the set. Even in Arena, it is going to be absolute trash. Boogeymonster? No. And now, we look a little bit into another old god's cards, N'Zoth. But we'll start off nice and easy with a Tentacle of N'Zoth. There are many Tentacle of N'Zoths, but this one's a card. Very simple, 1 mana 1/1, death rattle, deal 1 damage to all minions. It's basically like a neutral whirlwind. It's kind of like Explosive Sheep, but instead of 2 mana 1/1, deal 2, it's 1 mana 1/1, deal 1. It's a really cheap way to activate your Grim Patrons, now that Deathspite is gone. Yeah, could be a warrior shoe-in card. It is just another whirlwind, and you usually need whirlwind to combo with Tentacle of N'Zoth, so you get 2 whirlwinds. So it's a worse whirlwind, but maybe you need more whirlwinds. So that's about the most obvious place that the card goes, into a warrior deck with Grim Patrons. Will the Grim Patron deck still survive, even though it loses Deathspite? Find out soon, after we see all the cards. In Arena, Tentacle of N'Zoth should be pretty bad, kind of along the same lines as Explosive Sheep. Brood of N'Zoth. This is a 3 mana 2/2 with a death rattle, which is basically the power of the wild buff card, giving all your minions +1/+1 permanently, even if this thing is not staying around. Brood of N'Zoth, in order to get its value, needs to hit 2 minions with it, with its death rattle. So somehow you have 2 minions out already, and you play Brood of N'Zoth, and it dies. that might not be too hard. You can sacrifice Brood of N'Zoth in something like Zoo with Void Terror, but that is far too much work in order to get this effect. You can get 3 mana 4/4s with cards such as Ogre Brute, and those were not really played, so in a similar way this delayed effect, and it being a 3 mana 2/2, is going to mean you have to get at least 2 minions to get par for the value, and that seems very unlikely. So Brood of N'Zoth, no good in Constructed, and even in Arena it will be too slow, similar to how Nubissa's Sentinel is too slow. N'Zoth's First Mate. This is a really interesting card which takes Warrior in a bit of a different direction. Throughout the history of Hearthstone, there have been 3 main Warrior decks. There's been Control Warrior, there's been Patron Warrior. The last expansion included Reno Warrior, which is kind of like Control Warrior, and Golden Monkey Warrior, which usually was also Reno. And there was always, every once in a while, the Face deck, but N'Zoth's First Mate is a card that could support such a deck as kind of a mini muster for battle. For 1 mana, you're getting Light's Justice, which is a terrible card. 1 durability off Light's Justice, doesn't matter much, and you're getting a 1/1 on top of that. It's the type of very minor card which helps just fill in the amount of cards necessary that you need for such a deck. The card in theory is potentially up to, like, you deal 5 damage, realistically, with N'Zoth's First Mate. 1 mana deal that, that's pretty good. That would be assuming your N'Zoth gets in 2 hits for 2 damage, and then your Rusty Hook gets in 3 hits for 3 damage. And finally, worth mentioning, is that this card is a pirate. Unfortunately, Ship's Cannon will be rotating out of Standard, so that is a big blow to the pirate decks. But you can go turn 1 N'Zoth's First Mate, get that Rusty Hook, turn 2, you Bloodsail Corsair, and you get your 3/3. Definitely statted pretty aggressively. Is a really good card if there's a lot of aggro out there, because your Rusty Hook can just kill a lot of 2/1s or 1/1s. So in the case that a mid-range / face warrior deck should become good, N'Zoth's First Mate will probably see some play in that deck. A bit too low impact of a card to put into Control Warrior, though. In Arena, this card is going to be pretty interesting. Arena is currently a lot about tempo, so getting that Rusty Hook in addition to that 1 health minion, and possibly being able to deal with a 3/2 with your face and the combination of the First Mate is going to be pretty valuable. And it's a common, so Warrior Arena matters too. Warrior Arena's always had a problem with dealing 1 damage to stuff. And Warrior in general has a problem with dealing 1 damage to stuff. And now you can deal 1 damage to stuff 3 times. Good Arena card. And finally, with all that N'Zoth action, let's look at the big guy himself. We saw Cthulhu, and now N'Zoth, the Corruptor, has revealed himself. The battle cry is a pretty big one. Now, Naxxramas is rotating out of Standard, which is perhaps one of the reasons why they can even print a card like this card. And people have theorized that in Wild, all the good death rattles plus N'Zoth the Corruptor could be pretty wild. But currently there are still some really good death rattles out there in the game. There is Sylvanas, and there's Cairn. So people were speculating, okay, with Standard, will Cairn come back? Well, in a N'Zoth deck, Cairn will definitely be in that deck. So some of the cooler applications of N'Zoth are, with Anubarak will sometimes die a few times. If Anubarak dies 3 times, when you use your N'Zoth the Corruptor, you will summon 3 Anubaraks. That's pretty fun. Dreadsteed naturally kills himself. So if your Dreadsteed trades 3 times before you play your N'Zoth, then you're going to get 3 Dreadsteeds. Or maybe you've traded your Dreadsteed 6 times, and then you play your N'Zoth and then you fill your board of Dreadsteeds. Or actually, all you need to do is trade your Dreadsteed 5 times. A more practical application is you simply put N'Zoth in with some good death rattles, such as Sylvanas, Cairn, and Tyrion Fordring, and that's pretty good. There has been some clarification from Blizzard that it does not work with Ancestral Spirit or with hats. For example, Explorer's Hat does not make your minion suddenly a death rattle minion. In Wild, there's all sorts of wild applications here. which I can only begin to go over briefly with cards like Shredder and Sneeds and Sludge Belcher and Haunted Creeper and just all those good things. And I was earlier alluding to the Unearthed Raptor deck from Rogue. Used Unearthed Raptor to copy some cool death rattles, and perhaps he'll use N'Zoth, the Corruptor, to summon back Undercity Huckster, or a few of them. Worth mentioning that Unearthed Raptor does not come back because Unearthed Raptor does not have a death rattle, it merely has a battle cry. Given that this set is about the 4 old gods, I think it is not unlikely that we are going to see more cards with death rattle in them. Currently, we actually have a few. We have Corrupted Healbot, which is a 5-mana 6/6, so that's kind of value. You could bring that back with N'Zoth. You have also the card that people generally think of as bad, Infested Tauren. It is only Yeti stats, but it is Yeti stats, and maybe if you had a plan to bring it back, maybe the Infested Tauren is worth it. That pushes it a little bit more into the viability range. There's also been a card clarification which says that the minions N'Zoth summons are random. So that means you summon randomly to fill your board, however big that remaining board is. In Arena, this card will be really bad. So there you have it, N'Zoth the Corruptor. Difficult to evaluate this card before all the cards have been revealed for this set, but if there are Death Rattle cards, and I'm sure there are, because this set is all about the 4 old gods, that's in the title of the expansion, you have to assume that there would be something good with N'Zoth, something that was a good death rattle in this set. As you can see, all the old gods seem to have some kind of way to build your deck around that old god. Fun bit of trivia, with N'Zoth the Corruptor coming into Hearthstone, this is actually the first look that anyone has into N'Zoth, since it isn't in World of Warcraft yet, thus showing that Hearthstone is starting to become a more important game, lore-wise, than World of Warcraft is for the Warcraft universe. Hooray.
Now I've got a tale to tell you of the ones from long ago. There's an evil that's been dreaming, but now it's softly screaming. From the darkness, their power will grow. Their voices are made of poison. When you listen, you are sure to be disturbed. You can lock your doors. You can say your prayers. No creature can resist their wicked words. Never mind, no need to worry. That's all just a story of the whispers of the old gods.